to present here today. Very shortly, in very short terms, blind optics is invisible cinema. And I brought this concept here, where I'm trying to think through this concept for some time now, because I'm interested in what cinema is. I'm no artist. Actually, I'm not interested. I don't come from a filmmaking or a film critic background at all. I did a BA in journalism, and while I was studying journalism in Brazil, with some friends, we had a kind of pirate film society. We downloaded movies on the internet and showed them for free for people. Another illegal activity. And that showed me another side of cinema that seemed very interesting. These sort of processes that go behind the screen. And if you are really engaging with these things, you realize that the screen is completely secondary. The structure you need for cinema is much bigger and sometimes much more interesting than what's going on here. And of course, if you're doing piracy, you'll be framed into copyright discussions, into this sort of free culture dilemmas. But again, for me, at that time, for some other friends as well, that wasn't the more important thing. The sort of experiments, or the sort of possibilities of engaging with technology seemed more inspiring in a way. And to do piracy, to use computers to show feature films, as well showed us how well, digital cinema is something very domestic in a way, because it's not really different what you have in the multiplexes from, well, these operational systems. Some operational systems actually in use in big theaters run on Windows, which was quite shocking for me. And in a way, this is how I started researching cinema, from this sort of backdoor perspective as a projectionist, as a pirate projectionist. And I was very interested in building some sort of theory, or building some understanding of cinema that came from this perspective. I did a master on movie theaters because of that, in a way. And then I went on to do a PhD trying to go beyond that, trying to think of distribution, trying to think of larger concepts. And every time I tried to be very hands-on on these research. It involved a lot of setting up things. It involved doing installation. It involved doing screenings, some kinds of festivals. It also involved doing some filmmaking. And this is one piece that I did. It's very easy to include this thing that I will show right now as a glitch piece. It's called a knife or blade. And as you can see, it's all these artifacts popping up and everything. The thing is that I didn't really do anything here, not even this minimal data bending process that Nick was showing. What I did was just to cover the lens of a camera phone I had. And in the end, the camera phone itself, while trying to make sense of the darkness, the complete darkness, produces these things. So it produces image in a way out of nothing, denying this kind of essential optical mechanism of the camera that is so much related to technical images. The device, in fact, well, create some forms out of nothing, yes. And in that sense, what I'll be doing here today, and this is what calls for the idea of blind optics or invisible cinema. Of course, it doesn't end there. And there's an anecdote behind it as well. First time this movie was shown was in a normal film festival in Brazil, in my hometown, which is a very provincial place. And it was the last movie in the particular screening program, and as you can see, it doesn't really have sound. It's a very formal, structural, minimal piece. And as soon as this thing started showing on the screen after a lot of different videos of different genres, it doesn't really have opening credits as well. Well, 10 seconds after artifacts popping up on the screen, the projectionist just shut down everything. He thought that was a real glitch. So anyway, if you move glitch art outside of the glitch context, very much focused on the screen, and sometimes you criticize the image starts to convey some ideology, the image is trying to capture us, the spectacle, but there's actually another, more invisible thing and more essential processes running behind the image, on our backs. And it all shows another thing, because not only the projection is turned off everything, but no one realized it. People just, okay, so it's over, let's go home, and no one even, after that, when people were checking the program, they go, well, so your video wasn't shown, what happened? And actually it was shown, and you've seen about 10 seconds of it, but you don't know. And that was very frustrating, in a way. And I realized how much my interest in distribution, this happened when I was starting a PhD about distribution. This changed completely my focus from just distribution, like the transports of movies, into all the processes that go behind cinema, in a way. I try very much to stick to cinema because it creates these contradictions. If this movie was shown here, for example, as it was in Chicago, I hope, I wasn't there to check. Yes. You would see it and you say, oh, okay, interesting. Oh, it was produced with no camera, with no lenses. Interesting. But this sort of moment of deception, of disappointment, that for me was so revealing as well, wouldn't have happened. So I stick very much to cinema as a field of work. And what I will be showing you today is, I'm not the only one. There has been traditions since the beginning of cinema, or of photography. They are also trying to engage with these things, with these artifacts for image production, just devices for image production, but in a way that denies the obvious opticality of it. First, why I'm using optics in terms of instead of visuality? Why I'm talking about blind optics instead of invisible cinema, which is a more easy to understand term. This movement, this conceptual movement, is inspired by a German terrorist that has just passed away called Friedrich Hitler. And he tries to move away from vision into optics to give more attention to the technical dimension of media. He's what people call an anti-humanist, and he said that, well, vision is a very psychological thing. You have all these psychological mechanisms, this perception going on, like you can be daltonic and that changes everything. So if you really want to analyze visual media, you have to consider it as optical medium. My problem with that, with this idea of optics, is that you assume that there is a specific function to these devices. You assume that the cinema is this sort of optical channel, very neutral, pipes, where images that are autonomous objects just flow, like they go from reality through the camera, through the mechanism of distribution into the screen. And you see that that's where they were meant to be. And not really. The point that I want to make is that there's no such thing as a previous images. The images are brought into being right now. And that's not me, actually. Apparatus theory, that classical cinematographic theory, in a way says that the image only exists in the very moment of its instantiation. But it depends on a lot of small processes. And of course, it's very hard to escape the visual qualities of the visual medium. In a way, it's impossible even. Well, when Nick, for example, was talking about the different representations of binary data, oh, you have the cat, and you have the text, and you have the binary data, and he was pointing into the icon of the binary data. And in fact, it could be pointing at the computer, because the binary data is supposed to be stored here, right? But the problem is that the binary data itself doesn't exist. That's just an abstraction of electricity. So in a way, what I'm calling for here is this radical material understanding of cinema. The image here, in case, comes from different processes of storage and transmission. And the works that we're showing you today, it will be a mixed lecture exhibition, they try and show this process of storage and transmission, denying the obvious figurativeness of optics, which is something that comes from Renaissance, from this, well, projective perspection and stuff. And of course, this is as old as the optical devices are. In a way, as soon as photography was invented, or even before, people were using the photographic paper as a form of creating prints. This technique is called photogram, and it's probably being made popular by Man Ray, which was a Dadaist artist, photographer, and of course he reinvented the technique 100 years after the original invention and called it rayographs after himself. And this is maybe the most popular version of photograms, but it's very easy to do. You just put things in a photographic paper, expose them to light, and go and reveal it. And what you have is different shades of dark, depending on how much things were exposed to light. And here you don't have the same illusion of depthness that you have in normal photographs that use optics. And what this also reveals is not only that the depth in a photograph is an illusion. It also reveals that the image is entirely produced in the end, in the paper and by the paper. Here's a more recent example of a photogram called, this work is a series. It's called Papel Sensível, or sensible paper, because it uses photographic sensible paper. It's by a Brazilian artist called Cristiano Lenhart. It's from last year. And what he did here is he uses the photographic paper, but he didn't use any object external to the paper. He just folded the paper, exposed it to light, and go on and revealed it. And these patterns that you see, they are produced by the folds and by the paper itself. The image is completely contained and produced by the medium, in a way. And of course, as soon as you start to work with these, let's say, invisible techniques of visual media, you start to foreground the structures that you need to access and normally aren't available, and normally you don't even think about. In case of Cristiano, he was doing this during a sort of residence in a gallery in the northeast of Brazil, and he had to turn the bathroom of the gallery in how do you call it again? Revealing laboratory, in a photographic laboratory. And here's him working in the bathroom. So in a way, you also realize how much the structure of places, of spaces, this sort of macro structure, is organized to favor some engagements with the technology. Well, such as here, you have the beamer, but you don't really have some other things. And this is also something that a film theorist called Jean-Luc Comolli had spoken before. How much we have an invisible side of cinema, but this invisible side of cinema is not really filmmaking, for example. Because everyone here, I suppose, knows how to use a camera. Everyone here knows how to, well, even has used the camera before. Even edit videos, that's not so uncommon. If you ask a filmmaker, a professional filmmaker, most of them would have, at some point of their lives, both use the camera and edit the video, even if they are like this sort of very brainy directors that just command an army of employees. But I assure that not many filmmakers have developed their own films, for example. And of course, not many filmmakers have dealt directly with codecs in the way that Nick was dealing here, or that he does with his bridge codec tutorial. And in fact, this is the very material that is being used for creating these images. So there's already a logic of access, of engaging with the technology, that structures macro spaces, architectures, flows. That is, why is this opening? Sorry. And if we move on to these works, to these sort of blind optic works, we start to see how they can reveal these other structures to us. And they can also show certain aspects of the image itself that is not that clear, or how these aspects correspond to the process in the devices, in the mechanisms. Moving from static to moving image, this might be a good example to show you. And this is a movie by GLI, a New Zealander animator. And well, the technique is very hands-on and it's very non-optical. He etched it directly on veiled film. So we have black film, and the guy go there with a needle or a knife and do these marks. So he creates the animation straight on the film strip. What is very particular about this work of free radicals is that you have these sort of three-dimensional forms, not these ones, but these ones that turn in space. And this film is from 58, I think, or 62, something like this. And anyway, this effect to be accomplished with this technique was completely amazing. How did he do that? Like etching on film. The thing is that he didn't use only one needle. He used a sort of saw with many needles. So every time he did a mark, a trace in the film, he actually traced a lot of frames at the same time. So every form is relative to all the others. And what this kind of reveals about cinema is this correspondence between the duration of the form, these terms that they do, and the length of the film that he was using at the same time. So now it shows how the time of the image depends on physical characteristics. And that's why we speak in terms of feet when we talk about film. Or métrage in French. Like, we're actually talking about meters. That makes more sense in Portuguese, where we use also métrage. But a film of short métrage, it's a film with a with few meters, and that means that it has also shorter duration. And as you can see, the forms kind of last the same time because he was using always the same tool to draw. I just installed QuickTime, so I'm very sorry for this. And this is another work by another animator, famous animator called Norman McLaren, that instead of etching, uses optical print. So in a way, it's a sort of synthesization of image. But it also reveals sort of structural qualities of film. But now it's not about the image itself, but it's about sound. The piece is called Synchrony. It has to do with synchronization and chrome and color. And as you can see, it seems like a very rudimentary, audio-visualizing piece. And that's more or less exactly what it is. The fact is that these forms that you see here, these squares, they are actually square waves that were also printed in the soundtrack I just realized the irony of optical sound in a talk about blind objects. But anyway, to a certain extent, this is what these pieces do. When you start to ignore the always repeated image, you start to realize what is particular to each of these media. In the next example I want to show, I will move from cinema into video, and maybe the best piece that shows particularities of the processes used by electromagnetic video to produce images is this sculpture by Nanjun Paik called Magnetic TV. And as you can see, it's a huge and powerful magnet over a cathode tube television. And the thing is that the image you see is generated only by the magnetic field of these objects. And in that sense, it's very interesting because you cannot record this thing. You cannot just plug a VCR here and expect the image that's being shown on the screen to be registered on tape, because this is not really coming through the tube, through the antenna to the tube. This image is generated in the tube by the influence of the magnet. And in that sense, there's another interesting correspondence here between this and glitch. Nick was also talking before in the tutorial how glitch, or the effects of a glitch, depends on how the system or how the media player interprets the file. And to record these effects, sometimes you have to use a sort of snapshot, screen capture software on top of the media player. And that's more or less what happens here. If someone wanted to record the effects of what Nanjun Paik's piece does, you would have to film it again. Of course, for Paik, this is not really a problem. This is the central thing of the piece, the sculptural quality of it. Start to close this. And I couldn't find any video of this piece, which is actually very telling, because it's a sculpture and maybe it doesn't make that much sense to be recorded. Also because it's very hard to install it again. Because as you can see, it's something that depends on a certain type of technology. And this is not easy to find nowadays. I heard, that might be a legend, that the Nanjun Paik institution has bought a lot of these televisions in order to, well, have the piece shown for a long time, even after the actual objects are out of the market. But anyway, if you look in YouTube, you might find a lot of... I see what's happening. You might find a lot of videos that show these sort of effects of magnets on television screens, and they are quite amazing. And what is happening is that I just installed QuickTime to show another video to you, and QuickTime is very slow. My computer is very slow. And it opened 3 copies of it at the same time. And as you can see, there's supposedly no image in the screen. If you know how to affect it, you can produce even different colors. there's no such thing as a neutral channel. The television is not empty, ever. If it's turned on, the electricity is there. And we can think of the image as a sort of way to organize this electricity that is already there. This is the grand finale of the video. And of course, if you think of this idea that the image is just a way of organizing a sort of signal that is already on the television, that is already on the device, it's very easy to move into the concept of video synthesis and see that there is no real antagonism or dichotomy between the use of video for representation and the use of video for this sort of more abstract synthesis. This is a demonstration of the root after a synthesizer, video synthesizers. And as you can see, basically it's a sort of a lot of different effects or parameters used to organize the signal. When you have video, when you have analog video, you have a signal going through the screen in a certain frame rate, in a certain frequency. And what this machine does, this video synthesizer, is to alter the characteristics of the signal by certain parameters. And this creates these effects of, nowadays are very easy to do in any Flash or After Effects. But of course, combining these effects with one another, you move away very easily from this figurative dimension of video and start to get more abstract forms. And one very interesting thing to notice, following upon this relation between sound and image again, is that, and that's something that you can do at your homes if you still have these sort of old televisions, is that if you can, it's the same signal in a way, it's the same like electronic signal for audio and video. And if you connect the audio, an audio cable with an instrument in your video in port, in your TV, and play some frequencies, you see that the image reacts. And there's an artist called Billy Royce that uses this as the basis for a lot of her performances. Here, as you can see, the basis was an image of the artist. Some video artists use a feedback loop, and this particular performer uses the sound input of certain frequencies as the basis for video synthesis, because in the end it's just electricity anyway. Which brings us in the end to computers and the particularities of computers. I think that in the screening tonight and in the performance especially, you see best examples of how these material processes are shown on the screen. So what I brought today, in terms of examples of blind optics in computers, are more radical. But I will just introduce the piece that Dick mentioned, data diaries. Because there's also a sort of ready-made aspect to it that is interesting to consider. How much these colors and how much this movement is not really from the data, from the specific data. It comes from ways that the system interprets the data. And here you can see the original blocky feeling that Koryaki agent meant to create. But I wonder if there is really any problem in these new renderings of the piece where it becomes blurred. Because in a way this piece is more about the process that is being done than about the image, isn't it? Should we be so much interested in the image, in the actual formal qualities of it? Maybe. But even more interesting is how the piece suddenly reveals to us differences in the actual browsers, differences in browser history, and how the media players themselves are changing their way to interpret data. And maybe we wouldn't be aware of that if this piece didn't degenerate from its original representation to, well, in certain browsers it's shown not like this, not with these formal policies, but blurred. And another thing that I want to call your attention to is how much, in a way, morphologically, this is very much similar to the non-McLaren piece. And if we consider just the image, it's very hard to see the difference between them two. So at the same time that this piece can show us other understandings of cinema, in order to understand the piece, we also have to go beyond the image. We all have to consider the processes that are behind it in terms of creation. So, in terms of radical blind optics of computers, maybe this is the radical example I have to start. This piece called 15 Minutes of Porn, and as you can see, it's a DVD. And you can actually see the movies, the pornography, but you can see the visual effect it has on the medium of storage here, which is the laser burn tray in the actual disk. And now if we start to ignore the screen and consider other dimensions of the computer, a lot of new doors open up because it's a very complex thing. The mediums of storage are one of them. And here you have this correspondence between physical dimensions and time. 15 minutes of porn is this, 2 hours of porn might be that. And in that sense, there is correspondence between this piece and the line, with the length of film corresponding to durations. But we can also consider how the processor of the computer is very visual, it's very dynamic. We don't see it because it's extremely complex and minimal. But if we consider the original computers, and here is it's a modern construction of a difference engine, which is a mechanical calculating machine that originated computers. And as you can see, it's something extremely visual, something extremely spatial. And an Intel processor that we have nowadays, like a Core 2 Duo or i7 or whatever, it's just a lot of these things, a lot of these mechanisms, miniaturize it and compress it together. So if we had really powerful microscopes, maybe we could see the real movement, the real images that are going inside the computer. The problem is that microscopes bring us back to optics. And there's a sort of inherent paradox in this attempt to visualize the processes that are behind vision. Just one last piece before questions maybe, that shows these, let's say, minimal movements of computing mechanisms. Now again, in terms of storage, there's this piece from Valentina Fuchs called Hard Disco from 2007. And I don't really know if what is running on these hard disks is an image file, but it could be, since every data is just data. But again, she uses this sort of installation, she uses the mechanical movements of the hard drives as a sculpture, as a kinetic sculpture. But at the same time, this sculpture calls our attention to how much material data is, how much it depends on these sort of small processes. Wrap up with the topic of the whole festival. This is something that happened to us as well, this sort of awareness of the materiality. When a failure occurs, when we face this sort of non-domesticated glitches, when we face glitches in a sort of real-life situation. A couple of hours ago I was sitting back there drinking my tea and trying to prepare the presentation, and I spilled tea all over the computer. I was reminded once again that computers are very physical and they might just explode if you lose all the data and everything and the presentation. But yes, anyway, that's it. Thanks very much.